It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend at the lake cabin, my little slice of calm, away from the chaos. But just as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The gate was open, music was blasting, and cars I didn't recognize were lined up outside. At first, I thought maybe someone made a mistake. But as I got closer, I realized strangers were lounging on my porch like they owned the place. I asked them who they were, and they said they were invited guests. But I didn't invite anyone. Turns out, the neighbor down the road someone the HOA likes to call helpful. But most of us know her as the neighborhood Karen had told her friends they could use the cabin while it was vacant. Except it wasn't. I had just arrived. I calmly told them they had no right to be there and asked them to leave. That's when everything shifted. Less than 10 minutes later, Karen herself stormed up the trail, furious that I had kicked out her guests. She didn't ask questions. She didn't apologize. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called the cops, claiming I was being hostile on my own property. But what she didn't know was the real story behind the land. The cabin and how. The law wasn't quite on her side this time. And when the officers showed up and heard what really happened, her face said it all. ... When the deputies pulled into the drive, I could tell they weren't quite sure what they were walking into. Karen rushed up to them before they even stepped out of the cruiser, talking fast, waving her arms, pointing at me like I'd just committed some major crime. I stayed calm, just stood back and let her go off. I knew the truth would come out. Soon enough, one of the officers finally came over to talk to me. I explained everything, how this was my family's cabin, how I had the deed in my glove box, how I had found strangers partying on private property. I told him Karen had no permission to let anyone in, and I hadn't been aggressive, just firm when I asked them to leave. He listened, took notes, and nodded slowly. The other officer was still over by Karen, who was clearly getting frustrated that things weren't going her way. She kept saying the cabin was unused and that she was just trying to help her. Friends have a nice weekend. I could hear her voice cracking a bit now, not as confident as when she first arrived. Something told me this wasn't the first time she'd overstepped like this. Meanwhile, I noticed one of the guests slipping quietly into their car, as if trying to avoid further attention. Something about the way they acted didn't sit right. That's when I started wondering. How many times had this happened before, and what else was she hiding? As the officers continued sorting things out, I stepped aside and took a look around the property. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn: an empty cooler left behind with beer cans scattered near the dock, a broken chair tossed in the bushes, and muddy boot prints leading right up to the cabin door. This wasn't just an innocent mix-up. These people had made themselves at home, and not in a respectful way. One of the officers came over again, asking if there were any cameras on the property. I told him yes, trail cams out by the tree line and one over the porch. He jotted it down and asked if I'd be willing to share the footage. I said, absolutely. I had nothing to hide. But that question made me realize something deeper might be going on as the situation dragged on. Karen kept insisting the cabin was just sitting there and not being used. She talked like it was part of the HOA's jurisdiction, but this cabin's been in my family for decades, long before any of those HOA rules were even written. I started wondering if this wasn't about a one-time favor, but something bigger. Maybe she had been letting people in behind my back for a while, just as I was about to head inside. I overheard the officer talking quietly to his partner about other reports involving Karen. That word "other" stuck with me. What reports? Not exactly had she been doing in this neighborhood. I couldn't shake what I'd heard the officer say. Other reports that changed everything. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. I pulled out my phone, opened the Trailcam app, and started scrolling through the past few weeks. Sure enough, There were Eclipse people coming and going at strange hours, a few of the same faces I saw today. One clip even showed Karen walking around the back deck with a key in her hand. That key didn't belong to her. Inside, the cabin looked lived in. Blankets out of place, someone's sandals under the couch, and food wrappers in the trash I didn't leave behind. I felt sick. This place held my childhood memories, and now it felt violated. I stepped back outside just as the officers called. Karen over again. Her voice was louder now, more defensive than before. She kept saying she was helping the community and knew the owners wouldn't mind. One of the officers asked her if she had written permission. She paused. That silence said more than anything else. Then one of the guests who had been sitting quietly in their car suddenly sped off down the dirt road. The officers both turned, surprised. One of them quickly radioed for nearby units to intercept. That's when things shifted from an awkward HOA dispute to something far more serious. As the sun dropped behind the trees and blue lights bounced off the cabin windows, I realized I might not know the full truth about what Karen's been up to. All along, the car that sped off wasn't just a nervous guest. It turned out to be someone the local sheriff's office had been trying to track for months. One of the officers stepped aside to take a call, and when he returned, his whole tone had changed. He quietly asked me if I could provide the full trail cam footage and any security clips from inside the cabin. I nodded, though I was still trying to piece everything together myself. What had Karen gotten herself into and, worse, dragged others into? Karen was still trying to defend herself, but now she was stammering. She must have heard the radio traffic. Something was unraveling, and she knew it. That's when she slipped and said something she probably shouldn't have. They told me it was just for the weekend, she muttered, not realizing the officer was standing right behind her. The officer leaned in. Who's they? He asked. She froze. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for an answer she didn't have ready. That was the moment I realized. Karen might not have been the mastermind, but a willing piece in something bigger. This wasn't just about unauthorized guests at a lake cabin. The guests weren't who they said they were. And if Karen had been letting people use properties that weren't hers, under the radar, with no questions asked, what else had gone unnoticed? The officer told me quietly this may be tied to an ongoing investigation. That's when I felt the weight of it. We were in much deeper than anyone thought. Within an hour, 2 unmarked vehicles rolled up the gravel road and parked. Behind the patrol cars, a plainclothes investigator stepped out and went straight to the officers. There was no doubt now this had grown far beyond a trespassing dispute. The footage from my trail cams had apparently helped connect the dots. The guy who fled the scene wasn't just some random guest. He was wanted in connection with a string of break-ins at remote properties across the state. And Karen. She'd unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, been letting him and others use cabins like mine as quiet hideouts. The officers pulled her aside. She tried to play innocent, said she thought she was just doing people a favor. But her name was already on several past complaints. Neighbors who'd had missing tools, damaged fences, even valuables gone from storage sheds. It looked like Karen had been offering access to places she didn't own, getting something in return, and turning a blind eye to what happened after. They took her in for questioning. As they loaded her into the car, she looked at Manat with anger, but with fear. That's when I knew she finally understood how far this had spiraled. The cabin was quiet again. I walked down to the dock, still processing everything, thinking it was all over. But just as I reached the water, I saw something poking out from the edge of the old canoe. It was a key ring with at least 6 cabin keys on it. Only one of them was mine. I held the key ring in my hand, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. 6 keys, 6 cabins, none of them Karen's. I gave it to the officers, and they confirmed that at least 2 of the keys matched other cabins, reported in recent weeks for break-ins and suspicious activity. It was clear now this wasn't just a case of an HOA member overstepping boundaries. Karen had been enabling access to private properties for who knows how long, hiding behind her status and using HOA rules as cover. The next few days were a blur. I gave my full statement, handed over all the footage, and even helped officers contact other property owners. Each one had a similar story: small things missing, odd signs of someone being there, but never enough to fully prove it. Until now. Karen was facing serious charges, and authorities were investigating whether others had been involved or if she was just being manipulated by the wrong people. The cabin's peace slowly returned. I replaced the locks, updated the security system, and even added a few more trail cams just to be safe. But more than that, I made sure to talk to my neighbors' real conversations, not just nods at the mailbox. We agreed to look out for each other a little more closely. In the end, this wasn't just about trespassing or broken rules. It was about trust, how easy it is to lose it, and how important it is to protect what matters most, especially when no one's watching.